Handy Hudsonite here. I just wanted to give you an update on what I've done recently. I spent several hours changing out the struts and shocks on my minivan, my Honda Odyssey, and I wanted to just talk a little bit about that experience and what's entailed. It was a good learning experience for me, and I had changed out struts and shocks before, but this was my first time using a spring compressor to do the job because it's considerably less expensive to just buy this strut components and keep the original spring. It also ensures that you keep the original ride height on your vehicle. My Odyssey has struts in the front, it has shocks in the rear, and I would say that using the spring compressor tool was a bit daunting for me at first. I made sure I watched a lot of different YouTube videos on how to use it and how to use it safely. It does have safety pins on it. The biggest challenge I had with using the two-part spring compressor tool was to keep the two parts on either side of the spring, so essentially 180 degrees apart, because as I compressed the spring, they would want to move towards the center of the spring and move closer together. And so it actually took me about 3 tries to get it right. And if you've ever changed out a strut on a Honda Odyssey, the struts springs, I should say, are very large. And so this little spring compressor tool, I felt like wasn't completely adequate for it, but it did do the job. And after getting the spring compressed, there's the nerve-wracking moment when you undo the top nut that holds the whole assembly together. You have to loosen that so that you can take the strut components out and actually remove the strut itself. And I have to say, the first time that I took that off yesterday was really nerve-wracking, saying a prayer that God would protect me from anything that would happen, all the horror stories that you hear. Even Eric the Car Guy, if you follow him, he put up a video a while ago that he was actually undoing an Honda Odyssey spring, and he just had the bottom of it in a vice grip, and his clamps moved around, though he didn't have the safety pins for the clamp, the spring compressor tool, and the entire spring just, when he loosened that top nut, the entire spring just ejected out and just about seriously injured him. So it's not a job for the faint of heart. I don't recommend doing it if you are nervous around that type of activity. And there's shops that will do it for you. They have the spring compressor tools, the professional grade, and they can do it very quickly. I wanted to have the learning experience, and again, it's your risk of, if you try it, you have to be extremely careful, and knowing that you can get seriously injured or even killed in some cases. But it is a great inexpensive way to replace your struts. You have to make sure that you get the spring seated in it properly and the components in the exact same way that they came out off the original strut. And then reinstalling the strut, I found, was really tricky until I figured that once I mounted it on the knuckle of the wheel assembly first and got those bolted in, then what I could use is my floor jack, and then jack the whole assembly up so that I could mount the top, so I could get the bolts through the bolt holes up at the top with the car body and get that mounted in. Because on the Odyssey, there's a cover over the top of where the strut goes in, so it's actually really difficult to maneuver. And I didn't end up taking that entire cover off, but I did loosen the bottom of it so I could reach underneath it and take peeks underneath it to see where the top of the strut was. So once that got up through those holes and I had it mounted down, then I was home free, just making sure that I got all the connections back on the strut. like the brake line and the ABS sensor, and then reconnecting the stabilizer link. So that was my experience with replacing the struts. The shocks on the Odyssey and on most vehicles are very simple to do. It's just a upper and lower bolt that you undo, and you have to compress the strut a little bit in order to get it out. And then for the new one, what I did is my struts came pre-compressed, so I just slipped it over the bolt on the bottom and got that secured, and then cut the harness to let the strut expand. Not the strut, I'm sorry, the shock expand up until it got to the upper mount, and then I did have to jack up the wheel assembly in the rear a little bit to get the holes to line up, and then secure that down. So that was very quick. It only took me about 15 minutes to do both the shocks, maybe 15-20 minutes. The struts were another story, especially with that spring compressor tool, made it a very long process. When you go to replace the suspension, particularly the struts and the shocks on your car, just make sure that you are aware of all the steps. And I looked up all the torque specifications to make sure I got everything torqued down properly, as much as I could for both the struts and the shocks, so that to make sure that they were secured in. And drove it this morning, and takes the potholes and the bumps and the curves much better than it did before. So be sure to subscribe to my channel and hit that notification bell so that you know when I put up videos, and I will look forward to seeing you in the next one.